Every team walked into this season believing they had already solved the biggest problem in the league. The plan was simple, repeatable, and backed by real results. Pressure Caitlin Clark the moment she crosses half-court, deny her space, trap her aggressively, and force the ball out of her hands before the offense can even begin. It wasn't just a defensive adjustment anymore. It became the foundation of how teams prepared for Indiana. Entire scouting reports were built around it. Rotations were drilled specifically to execute it. And for stretches last season, it worked well enough to convince everyone this was the formula. That belief spread fast, because once a strategy shows even a little success against a player like Clark, the entire league locks in on it. There were games where the pressure disrupted timing, where possessions felt rushed, where the offense leaned too heavily on players who weren't ready to consistently create under that kind of intensity. Those moments gave defensive coordinators exactly what they needed, confirmation that the blueprint was real. And once that idea took hold, it became the standard approach. Stop Clark early and everything else will fall apart. But what nobody expected was how quickly that confidence would collapse. Not over weeks, not even over a full game. It happened in flashes, possessions that didn't look right, rotations that suddenly felt a step too slow, traps that created more problems than they solved. The same pressure that once controlled Indiana's offense started opening gaps instead of closing them. The structure was still there, the effort was still there, but something underneath it had changed. The blueprint wasn't producing the same results anymore, and no one on the floor seemed fully prepared for why. And here's where it gets even more surprising. This shift didn't come from Clark overpowering the system on her own. It came from what was happening next to her, in those exact moments when the defense committed everything to stopping her. While all eyes stayed locked on one player, another presence began reading the floor with calm precision, making the exact decisions the defense was designed to prevent. The traps didn't just fail, they became opportunities. The pressure didn't slow the game down, it sped it up in the wrong direction. That's the moment everything flipped. Because once a strategy stops working the way it's supposed to, it doesn't just weaken, it becomes a liability. And what the league spent months building to contain one player suddenly started breaking itself apart from the inside. What made the league's approach so dangerous wasn't just the intensity, it was how coordinated and deliberate it became against Caitlin Clark. This wasn't random pressure or occasional double teams, it was a full system commitment to take the ball out of her hands before she could even begin to operate. The moment she crossed the logo, defenders were already stepping up. One would shade her to a side, another would close the gap instantly, and suddenly she was facing a trap before the offense had even formed. Every possession started with the same question: can we force someone else to make the decision instead of her? And for stretches, that pressure did exactly what it was designed to do. It sped everything up, it forced early passes, it pushed the ball into situations where timing mattered more than talent. The idea was simple: if you disrupt Clark early enough, the rest of the offense never gets comfortable. Instead of flowing into sets, Indiana would be reacting, adjusting on the fly, trying to recover from the initial disruption. That's where mistakes happen, that's where possessions break down, and that's exactly what opposing teams were counting on. There was also a physical edge to it that rarely showed up in the box score, but mattered just as much. Every screen was contested harder, every cut was bumped, every touch came with contact. The goal wasn't just to stop her statistically, it was to wear her down mentally and physically over the course of the game, make every decision harder, make every dribble feel pressured. Because if you can turn even a fraction of her possessions into uncomfortable ones, you shift the entire rhythm of the offense. The most important part of this blueprint, though, was the assumption behind it. Everything relied on one belief, that once Clark gave the ball up, the possession could be controlled, that the secondary decision-makers wouldn't consistently punish the defense, that rotations would recover in time, that help defenders could reset before any real damage was done. And for a while, that assumption held just enough truth to keep the strategy alive. But that's where the flaw was hiding, because a system built on forcing the ball out of one player's hands only works if the next player can't immediately turn that advantage into something dangerous. And the moment that assumption stopped being true, the entire plan started working against itself.
If there was ever a perfect stage to prove that blueprint still worked, it was this matchup against the New York Liberty. This wasn't just another opponent trying to slow Indiana down. This was a roster built with the exact tools needed to execute that strategy at the highest level: size, length, experience, and elite defensive instincts at every layer of the floor. On paper, this was the kind of team that doesn't just run the Clark trap, it perfects it. At the center of that expectation was Breanna Stewart, one of the most complete players in the game, capable of switching across positions while still protecting the rim. Alongside her stood Jonquel Jones, whose combination of size and mobility allows her to disrupt both inside and out without sacrificing positioning. Together, they form a defensive front that doesn't just react, it anticipates, rotates, and closes space faster than most offenses can process. Add in their interior presence and length, and suddenly every driving lane looks narrower, every passing angle tighter. This was supposed to be the test where Indiana's offense finally hit a wall. A hostile environment, a championship-caliber defense, and a system specifically designed to take away their biggest strength. Everything lined up for the narrative people were already expecting. Pressure Caitlin Clark early, force difficult decisions, and let the rest of the roster struggle to keep up under elite defensive pressure. It wasn't just about winning or losing, it was about confirming that the blueprint still held against the best. But the game didn't follow that script. Instead of slowing down, Indiana sped up. Instead of looking uncomfortable, they looked composed. Possessions didn't break down, they evolved. The same defensive pressure that was supposed to control the game started creating openings, and those openings didn't go to waste. By the time the numbers settled, the Fever had put up 109 points against one of the most physically imposing defenses in the league. And that's when the real questions started to emerge. If this blueprint couldn't hold up here against this level of defense, then where exactly was it supposed to work? Because what happened next wasn't just unexpected, it forced everyone watching to rethink what they thought they understood about stopping Indiana. And then came the stretch that nobody saw coming, not because it was flashy, but because of how quietly it changed everything. When Raven Johnson stepped onto the floor, the expectation was simple: bring energy, defend, don't make mistakes. That's the usual role for a rookie, especially one whose reputation was built on defense. But within a few possessions, it became clear this wasn't going to follow that script. The pace didn't speed up in a chaotic way. It became controlled, deliberate, and almost surgical. Every time the defense shifted toward Caitlin Clark, Johnson was already processing the next move before it fully developed. What stood out immediately wasn't just what she did, but how quickly she did it. There was no hesitation, no overthinking, no forced attempts to prove herself. When the trap came, she didn't just move the ball, she moved it to the exact spot where it would hurt the defense the most. A quick read to the wing, perfectly timed. A swing pass that arrived just as the rotation broke down. A sudden drive into open space before the help defender could reset. These are decisions that usually take time for young players to learn, but Johnson was making them instinctively, as if she had already seen these situations hundreds of times before. One sequence captured it perfectly. The ball changes hands, the defense begins to retreat, and before anyone can settle, Johnson is already in motion. She pushes the pace straight through the middle, forcing defenders to collapse, then finishes at the rim without breaking stride. No play call, no setup, just recognition and execution. It looked effortless, but it completely disrupted the defensive rhythm. Because now, instead of controlling the tempo, the defense was reacting late, trying to catch up to decisions that had already been made. And that's when the realization started to sink in. The entire defensive blueprint was built around one assumption, that once Clark was pressured, the possession could be contained. But Johnson didn't just keep the possession alive, she turned it into an advantage. Every trap created space somewhere else, and she found it every time. Every rotation left a gap, and she attacked it before it could close. What was supposed to neutralize Indiana's offense was now feeding directly into it. In just 9 minutes, the dynamic of the game shifted. Not gradually, not subtly, completely. Because now the defense wasn't facing one decision-maker, it was dealing with two. And the moment that became clear, the original plan didn't just weaken, it stopped making sense altogether.
That's when the problem stopped being about one player and turned into something far more difficult to solve. With Raven Johnson and Caitlin Clark sharing the floor, the entire structure of the defense is forced into a decision it can't comfortably make. The original blueprint depended on commitment. Send pressure early, trap hard, rotate behind it, and trust that the possession would eventually stall out. But now, that same commitment creates an immediate imbalance. The moment two defenders jump Clark, the floor opens up somewhere else, and Johnson is already reading where that opening will be before the defense can recover. If the trap comes aggressively, the damage is instant. Johnson steps into a situation where the defense is already compromised, one pass away from a breakdown, one rotation behind where it needs to be, and she doesn't hesitate. The ball moves faster than the defense can shift. A wing is open for a clean look, the corner is exposed, or the lane opens just enough for her to attack before the help arrives. What used to be a controlled defensive action now turns into a scramble. And once a defense starts scrambling, it's no longer dictating anything. It's surviving possession to possession. But pulling back isn't the answer either, and that's where the trap becomes unavoidable in a different way. If defenders hesitate, if they decide not to overcommit to Clark, they're giving her exactly what she wants: space, rhythm, and time to operate. And that's the version of Caitlin Clark that defenses were trying to eliminate in the first place. A single step of separation is all she needs to create a shot, and once she finds that rhythm, the entire game tilts in her direction. So backing off doesn't solve the problem, it just shifts it right back to where it started. This is where the system flips completely, because now, instead of Indiana adjusting to the defense is reacting to Indiana, no matter what it chooses. Commit too much, and Johnson takes control of a broken floor. Commit too little, and Clark operates freely. There's no middle ground where everything stays intact. Every option carries a consequence, and both consequences lead to the same outcome: efficient offense. And what makes it even more unsettling for opposing teams is how early this is in its development. This isn't a fully polished system running at its peak. The timing, the chemistry, the instinctive understanding between Johnson and Clark, it's still growing. They're still learning where each other will be, how each other reacts under pressure, how to exploit different defensive looks. Which means what the league is seeing right now isn't the finished version, it's the starting point. That's the real shift. The blueprint didn't just stop working, it created a new problem that didn't exist before. And now, every team has to figure out how to defend a system where every decision they make is the wrong one. On the surface, it looked like an off night for Caitlin Clark. The shot wasn't falling the way people are used to seeing it. The numbers, 2 for 10 from the field, are the kind that immediately invite criticism, the kind that usually drive the conversation the next morning. For most players, that stat line would define the entire performance. It would be labeled inefficient, forgettable, maybe even concerning depending on the expectations. But this wasn't one of those nights, and judging it that way completely misses what was actually happening on the floor. Because even while the shots weren't dropping, the defense never treated her like she was struggling. Every possession still started with attention locked onto her position. Defenders picked her up early, bodies leaned into her space. Help rotated the moment she made a move. Nothing about the defensive approach changed, and that tells you everything. The respect didn't disappear with the missed shots. If anything, it stayed just as intense. And that constant pressure shaped every single possession, whether she scored or not. What that created was a different kind of impact, one that doesn't always show up cleanly in the box score, but controls the game just as much. When two defenders commit to the ball, something else opens up. When help shifts too early, a passing lane appears. When rotations stretch just a step too far, shooters find space. Clark didn't need to force shots to influence the offense. Her presence alone was enough to bend the defense out of position. The ball moved, the floor opened, and Indiana kept finding clean looks because of the attention she commanded. There were still moments where you could see the skill that makes her dangerous regardless of shooting rhythm. Attacking the paint through contact, finishing with touch, making quick reads under pressure. Those plays didn't disappear, they just came in different forms. Instead of a scoring explosion, it became a display of control, of understanding exactly how the defense was reacting and letting that reaction create opportunities elsewhere.
And then there's the number that puts everything into perspective. Indiana scored 109 points in a game where their primary scoring threat shot 20% from the field. That doesn't happen by accident. That doesn't happen unless one player is distorting the defense so consistently that the offense can function at a high level no matter what her individual shooting line looks like. It's not just about putting the ball in the basket, it's about shaping the entire environment in which the game is played. That's why this wasn't a bad game. It was a different kind of performance, one that shows a level of influence that goes beyond scoring. Because when a player can have an off shooting night and still be the central force behind an elite offensive output, it changes how you evaluate everything. And more importantly, it changes how opponents have to prepare, because now there isn't even a version of her that makes the offense easier to stop. For all the attention on the offensive explosion, there was something happening underneath it that didn't get nearly the same level of discussion, and it should have. Because while Indiana looked unstoppable with the ball, there was a quiet weakness developing on the other end that could become a serious problem if it isn't addressed quickly. It didn't show up in highlights, it didn't dominate the conversation, but it was there in the numbers and even more obvious on film. The rebounding gap told the story. Possession after possession, the New York Liberty were finding second chances, extending plays, and disrupting Indiana's rhythm in a way that doesn't always feel dramatic in the moment, but adds up fast over the course of a game. And this isn't just about giving up extra points, it's about what those missed rebounds take away. Because for a team built around speed and transition, the defensive rebound isn't just a stop, it's the trigger. It's the moment that turns defense into immediate offense, the spark that allows players like Caitlin Clark and Raven Johnson to push the pace before the defense can set. When that rebound doesn't come, everything slows down. Instead of attacking a scattered defense, Indiana is forced into half-court sets against a fully organized unit. And while they've shown they can still score in those situations, it removes one of their biggest advantages, the ability to create chaos in transition. It's like having a high-performance engine but struggling to get the ignition started consistently. The system still works, but not at the speed it was designed for. A big part of that issue comes down to physical matchups inside. The Liberty's size and presence around the rim created constant pressure on the glass, forcing Indiana into difficult positioning battles that don't always show up in traditional stats. It's not just about jumping higher or reaching farther. It's about leverage, timing, and understanding where the ball is going before it gets there. And in those moments, Indiana was just a step behind more often than they can afford to be. That's what makes this such an important detail, because against average teams, you might get away with it. The offense can outpace the problem, but against elite opponents, those extra possessions become the difference between control and vulnerability. Every missed rebound is another chance for the opponent to score, another delay in your transition game, another small shift that slowly tilts momentum the wrong way. And that's the part that hasn't fully entered the conversation yet. Everyone is focused on how dangerous Indiana looks offensively, and for good reason. But if this one issue lingers, it becomes the exact kind of flaw that top teams wait to exploit when the stakes are highest. And just as this system is starting to show real signs of becoming something dangerous, the organization is being forced into a decision that could reshape everything almost overnight. Because while the spotlight is on what's happening on the court, there's a quieter clock ticking behind the scenes, one that has nothing to do with schemes or matchups and everything to do with who actually survives on this roster. The Indiana Fever aren't dealing with a lack of talent. If anything, they have the opposite problem. Too many players have shown enough in a short window to justify a role, and not enough spots to keep them all. That's where the real tension begins. These aren't end-of-bench placeholders fighting for minutes. They're players who have already demonstrated skills that translate immediately. Shooting, spacing, composure under pressure, defensive versatility, pieces that clearly fit into what this system is becoming. And in a league where depth can quietly decide games over the course of a season, letting go of even one of those pieces isn't just a routine move, it's a risk. Because the moment a player with real value hits the open market, there are teams waiting, ready to add exactly what Indiana just gave up.
The complication is that this isn't happening during a rebuild where mistakes are easier to absorb. This is happening right as the team is stepping into a competitive window.
The emergence of the dual guard dynamic between Caitlin Clark and Raven Johnson has accelerated the timeline. The offense isn't theoretical anymore. It's functioning, and it's forcing real adjustments from high-level opponents. That changes how every roster decision should be evaluated. Now it's not about long-term potential alone. It's about who can immediately support and elevate what's already working. And that's where things get uncomfortable, because keeping the right players might come at the cost of flexibility, while creating flexibility might mean losing players who could thrive in this exact system. There's no easy balance. Every choice carries a consequence, and those consequences won't take long to show up once the season begins. A player released today could be contributing to a rival tomorrow. A missing piece now could become the exact thing this team needs in a critical moment later. What makes this even more complicated is timing. These decisions aren't happening months from now, they're happening fast. The window to evaluate, decide, and act is closing quickly, and once those moves are made, there's no clean way to reverse them. The roster that steps into the season will define not just rotations, but identity. It will determine how sustainable this offensive system really is, and whether the team has the depth to handle the adjustments that are inevitably coming. Because as promising as everything looks right now, this is the point where potential either gets reinforced or quietly limited. And the difference between those two outcomes might come down to decisions most fans never see, but will definitely feel once the games start to matter. What happened in that game didn't just challenge a strategy, it rewrote the entire conversation around how this team can be defended. For months, the league believed it had found the answer to Caitlin Clark. Pressure her early, force the ball out of her hands, and everything else would eventually break down. That idea felt solid, it looked proven. But now, with Raven Johnson stepping into that exact pressure and turning it into opportunity, that answer doesn't hold the same weight anymore. Because this isn't just about one game or one performance, it's about what that performance represents. The moment a system develops a second decision-maker who can read and punish defensive overcommitment, the original plan stops being reliable. And the most unsettling part for opponents is how early this still is. The timing between Clark and Johnson is still developing. The reads are only going to get sharper. The spacing, the communication, the instinctive understanding, it's all still evolving. Which means what teams are dealing with right now isn't the final version, it's the introduction. And that leaves the rest of the league in a difficult position. Do you keep committing to a defensive approach that just showed clear cracks, or do you back off and risk giving Clark the exact freedom you were trying to eliminate in the first place? Either choice comes with consequences, and right now both paths seem to lead to the same outcome, an offense that finds a way to produce. That's why this moment matters more than the score, more than the highlights, more than any single stat line. It signals a shift, a point where preparation meets reality and realizes it might not be enough anymore. Because when a team can thrive, whether its star is shooting efficiently or not, when pressure creates openings instead of shutting things down, and when a new piece changes how every possession unfolds, you're not just looking at improvement, you're looking at a problem that's about to spread across the league. So now the question isn't whether Caitlin Clark can be slowed down, it's whether anyone has a real answer left at all.